As authorities continue dishing out the presidential assistance to victims of floods in the economic capital, some victims have decried what they say is perceived discrimination in the distribution of the assistance. We shall be taking you to Bonatone, where some victims of the floods are fuming with anger over what they say that they have not yet received any assistance from the head of state or authorities, despite suffering enormous losses during Friday's floods in the economic capital, Douala. And we also tell you how the COVID-19 pandemic continued to weigh in on the functioning of enterprises in the country. Small and medium-sized enterprises say that they are crushing under the weight of the pandemic. Tonight, we met with entrepreneur Triya Shrebu, who tells us just how difficult it is to pay taxes as well as salaries during the COVID-19 pandemic. Those are top stories. Good evening and thanks for joining us. You're watching the Primetime Newscast on STV. Just as we told you in the headlines, some victims of the August 21 floods in the economic capital, Douala, have lashed out over what they say is perceived discrimination in the distribution of relief materials from the President of the Republic. This is the case of those in Bonatone, a neighborhood here in the economic capital, Douala, who are complaining that they have been sidelined from the presidential assistance. We have details with Katrin Kone.
Some inhabitants of the Bonatone neighborhood in the Douala 1 municipality who were victims of last week's flood have expressed dissatisfaction to the manner in which the presidential assistance was distributed by the Minister of Territorial Administration, Paul Atanganji.
Cela, nous avons reçu notre administrateur d'arrondissement qui est le maire, qui est venu voir les sinistrés de sa circonscription. Mais au jour d'aujourd'hui, les populations recensées par le chef de Bonatone n'ont rien eu. Ils n'ont eu droit à rien du tout. Par contre, tous les autres de Douala premier.
Surprise parce que depuis hier, nous avons appris qu'on est en train de partager les dons à ceux de Bonacquamois, Bessenguer. Nous ici à Bonatone, nous n'avons pas eu. Il y a des gens qui ont eu des matelas, des couvertures, à manger aussi, des seaux. Nous aussi, nous sommes surprises depuis hier. Nous sommes allés là-bas à la salle des fêtes, c'était déjà fermé. On n'a rien eu.
They say, despite being registered under those hardly hit by the flood, they were shocked not to be among the beneficiaries.
Bonatone a mis une commission de recensement pour les sinistrés. Il a reçu une liste depuis lundi, mais à la grande surprise, devant les médias, on a vu que les autres quartiers de Douala qui ont été des sinistrés ont reçu des dons du chef de l'État et Bonatone a été lésé. Nous ne savons pas ce que Bonatone a fait à l'administration afin que nous puissions subir cela. Par contre, on sait que c'est le chef de l'État, le père de la nation, qui a fait ce don pour tout le peuple sinistré.
3 days after the heavy flood rendered some neighborhoods practically impassable and recorded enormous material damages, Minister Paul Atanganji visited the inundated areas and distributed the presidential aid to victims of the flood. But unfortunately, many are still to receive the gifts.
Minister of Territorial Administration Paul Atanganji is in the West region where he has given out presidential aid to victims of floods in Sancho, while urging authorities as well as the population to respect building norms and also see to it that drainage systems are cleaned in a bid to mitigate the phenomenon. Now, the role of the Red Cross is indispensable during natural disasters, and the recent floods in Douala have once more tested the capacity of the Red Cross to manage the situation, especially dealing with victims. Officials of the body have maintained that their primary role is to save lives. Our reporter Josephine Binzi reports.
Managing natural disasters can require another level of unexpected efforts as the population may have divergent needs. An assessment of the crisis heat zone may be the foundation to properly assess the necessity of the population.
On ne peut pas ramener les populations dans leur site sans avoir fait une évaluation. Je dis que cette évaluation peut nous pousser.
We cannot help them without proper evaluation. This evaluation can help us solve certain hypotheses. Sometimes, pipes have been burst that permit water to flow out profusely, and they will equally need food because they have been displaced from their place of habitation, and clothes and other immediate necessities are also needed.
Et autres, je dirais comme ça, à la volée.
In a season where the rains are compelling the population to be far prudent, the Red Cross Association, specialized in attending to emergencies, have a well-mapped out plan.
Les catastrophes en général, ça se prépare. C'est-à-dire avant la catastrophe, avant le sinistre.
We always prepare for natural disasters. We have benevolence all around the city to aid those who will be in need, as well as materials involved. And before doing any of these, we identify all the risk zones. So when there is disaster, we call on those involved to go down to the field as we try help the population get out of water. Because we are aware when there are floods, people are stopped. Some of them may be hanging on rooftops, so we get them out of there.
Les gens sont coincés. Parfois sont au niveau des toitures des maisons. Nous aidons donc à sortir des zones.
Floods are ravaging the city of Douala. Like the recent case of August 21, authorities are working tirelessly to mitigate the effects of another possible disaster in future. The population is called upon to remain vigilant before disaster strikes again.
Let's talk something different. The COVID-19 screening center in Bonasama, Douala 4, that was initially closed, has now resumed operations. The center was closed over what was said to be the alleged non-payment of salaries to some workers who were sent to the center. Now, officials say that despite the opening of the center last Monday, the turnout remains timid. Details with Ladonet Oni.
After being closed for over 3 weeks due to the absence of salaries, the COVID-19 screening center Bonasama in the Douala 4 municipality has fully resumed its activities.
We opened last Monday. We are working for still an activity of COVID. They are saying that we open under certain conditions. No. We are working for an activity of COVID, that is why we are here. And as I earlier said in the French language, while the need will still be there, we are going to be here working. Yeah.
A good number of inhabitants have responded to the opening of this center. However, the number of patients received has drastically dropped.
The population is reducing as compared to the first days when the pandemic was still at the climax. And presently we mostly note people, travelers who are coming around. Yeah, we have fewer people who are coming for their routine checkups.
Different measures have been adopted by the medical body so as to further sensitization and ensure the free testing of every individual.
We have mobile teams which have to cover all the health centers, all the health areas. So presently today we have 3 teams, one here where you're presently, and you have 2 teams that are in the quarters. We have 2 teams today, they are working at Grand Hangar. Since it's a relatively larger quarter with a bigger population, the 2 teams are present there but at 2 different posts in order to be able to cover the population willing to go for the voluntary testing today.
This is one of the 9 centers created by government in the decentralization plan against the COVID-19.
Just as we told you in the headlines, Cameroon's employer cartel GICAM reveals in a report that over 90% of companies have been shocked by the COVID-19 pandemic. Small and medium-sized enterprises have suffered enormous losses as a result of the pandemic. Katrin Kone spoke to Treya Shrebu, an entrepreneur who tells us just how difficult it is to pay taxes and salaries in the context of the pandemic. Her report.
As Cameroon continues to fight for the eradication of coronavirus, the dreaded disease is still hitting hard on enterprises. A case in point is small and medium-sized enterprises.
It's not the case because the highest employers are owners of small and medium-sized enterprises, and the civil servants continue to receive their salaries because taxes are being paid without any problem. Because salaries of those working for the small and medium-sized enterprises are no longer being paid, but we continue to pay the taxes, we continue to pay rent, we continue to pay money at the level of the banks, we continue to face serious pressure from financial institutions.
Moreover, the preventive measures against the COVID-19 health crisis, he says, were not implemented on the field, thus affecting these enterprises.
Measures were put in place by the government through the Prime Minister and the head of government, and some of those measures are not being implemented in the field. Those who were given the responsibility to implement the measures, they are not doing their job the way they were supposed to be done. So that is one of the reasons why you will notice today that financial institutions keep exercising pressure on owners of small and medium-sized enterprises. Some go as far as even closing the bank accounts of these small and medium-sized enterprises enterprise owners. Some go as far as even seizing their properties kept at their disposal to get money. So,
according to him, if Cameroon enters the second phase of the pandemic, things will be catastrophic to small and medium-sized business owners.
Cameroon should face a second phase of another pandemic, as announced by the Minister of Health. I think it will be extremely catastrophic. Catastrophic in the sense that if you look at the tourism sector, I think they have paid 3 or 4 times the greatest price. You must have seen, I am speaking from a standpoint of the publisher of a newspaper, entrepreneur that you know. In one of our last edition, we were struggling to indicate the agony that the tourism sector is going through, and in another edition we indicated that 99% of hotels owner were out of activity, their activities completely, and that is the same situation with me here. That is the same situation with other SME owners that you will see out there. So if the government does not accompany or give some kind of subventions through the bank of SME, I think it will be extremely difficult for us to survive this other phase of the pandemic.
He, however, urged the government to have a meeting with financial institutions for them to review their policy, which will be beneficial to small and medium-sized.
Cameroon has recorded a 13.2% loss in the aviation sector between April and June 2020 due to COVID-19 shocks. Reviving the sector will be hinged on investments as well as good management. Josephine Binza reports that the peak period from October to December might just be the time that the aviation sector will kick off if proper measures are being put in place despite the COVID-19 pandemic. Her report.
The COVID-19 pandemic has had a catastrophic effect on the aviation sector, with affected lost traffic to be about 4.6 billion passengers in 2020. As lockdowns are easing, most airline companies are skeptical if a recovery is possible due to the high death rates recorded by the pandemic worldwide, as well as a massive loss of employment. January, February and March were pre-COVID months, which consists the first quarter of the year where businesses were normal and flights regular. The second phase slapped the whole world to its face, as in April, May and June were lockdown seasons which hampered movement worldwide. Businesses were merely surviving and few passenger flights were recorded. Airlines responded by increasing flights to a low level of activity, initially on domestic flights, but tentatively inter-European flights to countries that have demonstrated control of the COVID-19 virus. The green shoots of recovery are positive signs for the industry, but this slight increase in revenue has little effect on the costs based on an airport.
The business and touristic sector in Cameroon has witnessed about 13.2% drop in April, May and June months as compared to previous years, which received over 2,000 visitors from around the globe. The aviation recovery process in Cameroon may be an impossible mission, say some economic experts, for the country has just October, November and December to draw strength from, which are seasons where the Douala and Sigmalen airports receive over 10 million travelers during that time of the year. The high death rates and unemployment worldwide will see lesser visits in the last quarter of the year.
The Member of Parliament for Vure Centre has lashed out at separatist fighters for bringing untold suffering to the population of the northwest and southwest regions of the country. Joshua Osi, who was guest on the program Hard Talk on STV, says that it would take enormous effort to rebuild the northwest and southwest regions despite government's efforts to begin the reconstruction process. He has cautioned the government to take concrete measures in order to bring the situation under control. Let's listen to him.
I think that we had been going a long way. We were focused to go towards solving this problem. That's exactly what I wanted to say. But people at one point wanted a shorter cut, not knowing that the easiest thing is to start a war. The most difficult thing
is to sustain it.
Is to not only sustain it, is to stop it.
And to stop it as well.
Is to stop it. And that's where we find ourselves. Everybody understands that the biggest stupidity you could have wished for our country or for the northwest or the southwest is what is going on there right now. Whatever you think, be you a separatist, be you a whatever, what is going on there right now, let's be frank with ourselves, is pure stupidity. You cannot be killing civilians day in, day out from whatever side you're killing them and believing that you can solve a problem with that. That's not the way it works. You cannot be saying that you are fighting for Anglophones and all those you kill are Anglophones. That doesn't work. You cannot have some sort of a monopoly of being Anglophone. You cannot pretend to be more Anglophone than I am. You cannot pretend to be more Anglophone than you are. We are all Anglophones. We all have a right to an opinion. And the minimum we have to do is to respect each another's opinion. It might not go the way we think, but we cannot solve that with violence. So now we find ourselves in the middle of a spiral of violence, in some sort of a vicious circle, and everybody complains, everybody accuses the other, everybody wants to do. No. Now that we are in there, the price to come out of it is high, is huge. And let me tell you that if we don't work it out carefully, once we come out of this cycle of violence, whatever the outcome, if we don't work it out carefully, we will be much further behind than where we were when it started.
Out of the country, on the second night of the four-day Republican National Convention, U.S. First Lady Melania Trump offered her case for a second term for President Donald Trump, joining others including the Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, who broke with tradition and delivered his speech from Jerusalem in Israel. We have details with the VOA.
From the White House Rose Garden, First Lady Melania Trump sought to convince Americans that her husband deserves a second term, addressing a key concern among voters.
Donald will not rest until he has done all he can to take care of everyone impacted by this terrible pandemic.
Secretary of State Mike Pompeo delivered remarks from Jerusalem, breaking protocol of State Department employees avoiding openly partisan activities while abroad.
The President, too, moved the U.S. Embassy to this very city of God, Jerusalem, the rightful capital of the Jewish homeland.
Pompeo highlighted Trump's recent announcement of the normalization of relations between the United Arab Emirates and Israel, a deal rejected by Palestinians. He also reminded voters of Trump's America First doctrine.
So I think you will continue to see gestures to what the Trump presidency thinks are its wins. And I think Pompeo's appearance in Jerusalem is probably the chief among those gestures, and also meant to mobilize voters who really care about Israel.
Following Donald Trump Jr.'s speech on Monday, siblings Eric and Tiffany also touted their father's achievements. On Tuesday, Trump again made appearances from the White House, breaking tradition from presidential nominees who usually stay out of the limelight until the last night of the convention. Despite his hardline immigration policies, Trump witnessed the naturalization ceremony of 5 new Americans, another first in convention history.
You've earned the most prized, treasured, cherished, and priceless possession anywhere in the world. It's called American citizenship.
While former Presidents Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, and Jimmy Carter spoke at last week's Democratic National Convention, former Republican President George W. Bush is not featured this week. He and his late father, former President George H.W. Bush, also sat out the RNC 2016 convention.
I think what this speaks to is the revolution in the party that Donald Trump has effected over 4 years. He has changed the Republican Party more than any man since Ronald Reagan.
Vice President Mike Pence will formally accept his nomination in a speech scheduled for Wednesday. Patsy Widakuswara, VOA News at the White House.
And that wraps this edition of the Primetime Newscast on STV. Thank you very much for watching. Take the rendezvous same time tomorrow for a fresh edition of the newscast. More news comes up at 8 p.m. in the French language. Until tomorrow, have a good night. Bye-bye.